Hey everyone, welcome back. You ready for a deep dive into something interesting? We're tackling the psychology of money this time.
It's a good one.
It really is. And when I first picked it up, I thought it was going to be, one of those typical finance books.
Right. Lots of numbers.
Yeah, like how to budget, how to invest. And don't get me wrong, it has some of that. But what really hooked me was how it dives into the psychology of it all. Like, why do we do the things we do with money, even when we know better?
Totally. It gets at that human element of finance, which is
Mhm.
often ignored. We like to think we're making these perfectly rational decisions with our money,
Right.
but we're not, are we?
Not even close.
Emotions come into play, biases, past experiences. Our brains are kind of a mess when it comes to money.
It's so true. And the book does a really good job of explaining why. One of the things that blew my mind was it talks about how so many of the financial concepts we take for granted today, they're actually pretty new.
Oh, absolutely.
Like think about 401k,
Yeah.
index funds, even the idea of credit card debt. Our grandparents, they were dealing with a totally different financial landscape.
Right. Completely different. It's no wonder so many people feel lost when it comes to money. It's like we're all figuring it out as we go.
Exactly. And that's part of what makes understanding the psychology of it all so important. Because if we don't understand our own biases, our own hang-ups around money, we're kind of flying blind.
100%. Self-awareness is key. You got to know your own weaknesses, your tendencies if you want to make smart choices.
Okay, so get this. The book talks about Bill Gates, right? Classic success story. Programming whiz kid builds a tech empire. But then it throws in this detail that just blew my mind. Back in the late 60s, when Gates was in high school, his school was one of the only size schools in the entire world that actually had a computer.
I mean, talk about luck, right?
Right. And not just that, he and Paul Allen, his Microsoft co-founder, they practically lived in the computer lab, coding all night, honing their skills. The book says the chances of any teenager having that kind of opportunity back then were like 1 in a million.
1 in a million.
It makes you think about all the what ifs, doesn't it? Like, what if Gates had gone to a different school?
What if that school hadn't had that computer lab?
Exactly. Would Microsoft even exist today?
Hmm.
It really makes you realize how much of success is about being in the right place at the right time.
Absolutely. There's a huge element of luck involved in success, that's for sure. It's not always about hard work or even talent. Sometimes it's just about being lucky. And the flip side of that is sometimes things happen that are totally out of our control.
So true. The book actually talks about this too. It tells the story of Kent Evans, who was Bill Gates' best friend back in those high school days.
Mm.
Apparently, Evans was just as gifted as Gates when it came to computers, and they were inseparable. Big dreams, changing the world with technology. But then, tragically, Evans died in a mountain climbing accident. Still a teenager.
It's heartbreaking, and it just goes to show that, even with all the talent and opportunity in the world, we can't control everything. Life throws curveballs.
It's a good reminder, though, isn't it? That we should appreciate what we have and not get too caught up in the what-ifs.
Definitely. And that's where this idea of appealing fictions comes in, which the book talks about.
Oh, yeah, I love that part.
It's like we tell ourselves these stories, these narratives, to try to make sense of the world, especially when it comes to money and success.
Because it's scary, right?
Yeah.
Thinking that maybe it's not all up to us, that some of it is just random.
Exactly. We crave certainty, so we create these narratives, even if they're not totally true.
So are you saying we should just, give up?
Yeah.
Stop trying to improve our lives?
Yeah.
Because it's all just random chance?
Oh, not at all. I think it's more about recognizing that element of chance, of luck, and not beating ourselves up if things don't go according to plan. It's about being adaptable, resilient, and it's about focusing on what we can control, which is our own efforts, our own attitude.
Okay, that makes sense. So instead of chasing some arbitrary definition of success, maybe it's more helpful to define what enough looks like for us. The book actually contrasts two very different individuals to illustrate this point. John Bogle, the founder of Vanguard, who was a big proponent of simplicity and just having enough.
Right. Loved his philosophy.
And then there's Rajat Gupta, who was a former CEO of McKinsey. Brilliant guy, but he got caught up in this whole insider trading scandal.
And he risked and ultimately lost $100 million fortune. For what? The chance to make an extra billion.
It's mind-boggling. It really makes you question, what is enough? When do we stop chasing more and appreciate what we already have?
Right, because there's always going to be someone who has more, who's doing better. Social media definitely doesn't help with that.
Oh, tell me about it. So how do we break free from that cycle of comparison? How do we figure out what enough actually looks like for us?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And honestly, I don't think there's one right answer. But I do think it starts with self-reflection, with really examining our values, our priorities.
So, like, what's truly important to us in life?
Exactly. And once we have a better understanding of that, then we can start to align our financial decisions with those values.
Okay, that makes sense. So it's not just about accumulating wealth for wealth's sake. It's about using money as a tool to create a life that aligns with what we truly value.
Exactly. Money in and of itself isn't inherently good or bad. It's what we do with it and how we let it affect our mindset that really matters. And that's something this book really drives home, I think.
It does. Okay, so the book then shifts gears a bit, and it starts talking about saving. And I'll be honest, when I hear that word saving, my eyes kind of glaze over.
Yeah, it doesn't exactly scream excitement, does it?
Not really.
Yeah.
But the book has this really interesting analogy that helped me reframe how I think about saving. Imagine you want a new car.
Right. Okay, I'm picturing it.
You could buy it outright, which would be the most expensive option. You could buy a used car, which would be more affordable.
Uh-huh.
Or, if you're feeling really risky, you could try to steal one.
Risky and not exactly illegal.
Definitely not. But the point is, each option has a different level of risk and reward, right?
For sure.
Well, the book argues that saving is kind of like buying that used car.
Interesting. I'm listening.
You're getting something valuable, but you're not paying full price for it. You're willing to be patient, to wait a little longer to reach your goal.
So it's about delaying gratification.
Exactly. And it's about recognizing that there's a cost to everything, even if that cost is just time and patience.
It's like that saying, there's no such thing as a free lunch.
Exactly. Okay, I want to be honest. I was totally that person who was trying to find the shortcut, the get-rich-quick scheme. But the more I read about the psychology of money, the more I realize that real wealth, the kind that lasts, is usually built slowly and steadily.
It's the long game, like building a house brick by brick.
Yes. And it's about enjoying the process, the journey, not just fixating on the destination.
Because sometimes the journey is where you learn the most, right?
It's true. And honestly, I think that's a good place to wrap up this part of our dive.
And that brings us to what might be the most important concept in the entire book. The often overlooked power of saving.
Okay, but I'll admit, when I hear saving, I immediately think rice and beans for every meal.
Yeah, not exactly glamorous.
Not at all. But the book does a good job, I think, of reframing saving, not as deprivation, but as this way to unlock freedom and options in your life.
Exactly. It's not about what you're giving up today. It's about what you're gaining for tomorrow.
I like that. It's about having choices.
Exactly. And the book highlights this guy, Derek Sivers. He's a musician, and he basically saved like crazy in his early 20s so he could quit his job and focus on music full time.
Wow.
Yeah, he lived really frugally, invested wisely, and by his mid-20s, he'd reached his version of enough.
That's amazing. And it kind of reminds me of what we were saying earlier about defining what enough means for you. Like, it's not necessarily about early retirement, although that's great for some people.
Right.
It's more about having the financial security to take risks, to pursue your passions, even if they're not, the typical high-paying career path.
100%. It's about having the freedom to say no to things you don't want to do, whether it's a job you hate or a commitment you're not passionate about.
It's about having control over your time and your energy, which honestly is priceless.
Absolutely. And this ties into another key idea from the book that I wanted to touch on, minimizing future regret.
Oh yeah, I love that part. It's about making choices today that our future selves will thank us for.
Right. And the book tells this great story about Harry Markowitz.
Wait, is he the economist?
Yeah, he's a Nobel Prize winner known for his work on portfolio optimization, super complex stuff.
Okay, so I'm assuming this guy has some incredibly complicated investment strategy.
You would think, right. But here's the thing. When it came to his own retirement savings, Markowitz followed a really simple 50-50 approach.
You're kidding.
Nope. He split his money evenly between stocks and bonds. That's it.
Wow, so he wasn't trying to time the market or anything.
Not at all. He was prioritizing peace of mind. He knew that by keeping things simple, he was minimizing the potential for future regret.
I love that. It's so refreshing to hear that even a Nobel Prize-winning economist opted for simplicity.
Right. And it really highlights that there's no one right way to invest. What matters most is finding a strategy that you understand, that aligns with your risk tolerance, and that you can stick with over the long haul.
Which is so much easier said than done,
Right.
right? Because there's always that temptation to tinker, to chase the latest hot stock tip.
Oh, absolutely. We're constantly bombarded with information, with noise that tells us to do something different, something more, something better.
And that's where the book's central message, shut up and wait, comes into play.
Right. It's about tuning out that noise, resisting the urge to constantly tinker with your investments, and just letting compound growth work its magic over time.
That shut up and wait philosophy is so simple, yet so hard to actually do. At least I find it hard.
Oh, me too. It goes against our natural instincts. We're wired for instant gratification. We want to see results immediately.
Totally. Like,
Yeah.
when was the last time you actually waited for a website to load instead of just refreshing it a million times?
Or abandoned a shopping cart because the checkout process was taking too long.
Exactly. We're so used to getting what we want when we want it. But investing, it doesn't work that way. It's a long game. And the real magic of compounding, it happens over decades, not days or weeks.
And it's not linear either. It's not this steady, predictable climb upwards. There are going to be dips, there are going to be crashes, but as long as you've got a solid plan and you stick with it, the odds are in your favor.
It's about focusing on the process, not the short-term fluctuations.
Exactly. And it's about understanding that volatility is just part of the game. It's the price of admission to this whole investing thing.
Ooh, I like that. The price of admission.
Right.
Because you wouldn't expect to go to Disneyland for free, right?
Right.
You pay for the rides, the entertainment, the experience.
Exactly. And when you invest in the stock market, you're essentially paying for the opportunity to participate in long-term growth. But that growth, it comes with ups and downs.
So it's like paying for the roller coaster, knowing that there are going to be some thrilling drops along the way.
Exactly. And it's about having the stomach for those drops, for that volatility. Because the people who panic and sell when the market dips, they're the ones who miss out on the long-term gains.
They're the ones who jump off the roller coaster in the middle of the ride.
Exactly. And that's precisely why understanding the psychology of money is so important. Because when we understand our own biases, our tendency towards instant gratification, our aversion to loss,
Right.
we can start to make more rational decisions that align with our long-term financial goals.
We can enjoy the roller coaster ride.
Exactly, because at the end of the day, that's what it's all about, right? Enjoying the ride.
I love that. Okay, so we've talked about the importance of saving, of understanding our own psychology, of embracing the shut up and wait philosophy. But how do we actually put all of this into practice in a world that often feels chaotic and unpredictable?
Right, because it's one thing to talk about it, but it's another thing to actually do it, right? Especially when the world around us feels like it's constantly changing, when there's always some new crisis or market crash dominating the headlines.
Okay, so how do we stay the course? So we've talked about tuning out the noise, but how do we actually do that? Especially when it comes to money, and everyone's got an opinion on what we should do.
It's tough. I think that's where that whole shut up and wait philosophy comes in again. It's about trusting the process, even when it feels uncomfortable.
Oh, I can relate to that because it does get uncomfortable sometimes.
Oh, absolutely. Especially when the market's down and everyone's freaking out.
It's like you just want to do something, anything, to feel in control.
And the worst thing you can do in those moments is make an emotional decision, because that's when people tend to make their biggest investing mistakes. They sell low and buy high, which is the opposite of what you want to do.
So how do we resist that urge to panic?
Well, I think it goes back to having a solid plan in place, a plan that aligns with your goals, your risk tolerance, and that you understand fully.
Right, because if you don't understand why you're invested in something in the first place, it's a lot easier to get spooked when things go south.
Exactly. And this might sound counterintuitive, but I think it's helpful to actually get comfortable with the idea of volatility. Like, accept that it's just part of the game.
We talked about that earlier, the price of admission idea. Like, it's the fee we pay for the opportunity to grow our wealth over time.
Exactly. And the book makes this really interesting point. It says that pessimism often sounds smarter than optimism, especially when it comes to money.
What do you mean by that?
Like, think about it. It's much easier to point out flaws, to highlight risks, to tell a compelling story about why things are going to go wrong.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
You can always find someone predicting the next market crash.
Right. It's almost like it gives people a sense of intellectual superiority to be pessimistic. Like, I'm a realist. I see the world for what it truly is.
And optimism, it can feel naive, right? Like you're burying your head in the sand.
Exactly. But the problem is that kind of negativity, it can become a self-fulfilling prophecy.
So how do we balance that healthy skepticism with the optimism needed to stay invested for the long haul?
It's a delicate balance, for sure. But I think it starts with being mindful of the information we consume. Like, are we surrounding ourselves with doom and gloom all the time?
Right, because negativity can be contagious, can't it?
Absolutely. It's important to curate your news diet, I think. Don't just focus on the negative headlines. Make sure you're getting a balanced perspective. And remember, the media often focuses on the negative because that's what sells. It's what gets clicks. It's what gets attention. But it's not always representative of the bigger picture.
So it's about staying informed, but not letting the news cycle dictate our emotions.
Exactly. And I think it's also helpful to remind ourselves of the long-term trends. Like, yes, the market goes up and down in the short term, but over the long haul, it's trended upwards.
That's the power of compounding, right?
Exactly. And that requires us to zoom out, to look at the bigger picture, and not get caught up in the day-to-day fluctuations.
So much easier said than done, though, right? Our brains are kind of wired to focus on the immediate threats, the potential losses.
It's true. It's that whole fight or flight response kicking in. But the more we can train ourselves to think long-term, to focus on the bigger picture, the better off we'll be.
Both financially and probably mentally and emotionally too, right?
100%. And I think that's a really good takeaway from all of this. It's not just about the money. It's about finding peace of mind. It's about aligning our financial decisions with our values.
Because at the end of the day, money is just a tool.
That's it. It's a tool that can be used for good or for bad. It's up to us to decide how we're going to use it.
I like that. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive.
Yeah.
What an incredible conversation this has been.
I agree.
We've covered a lot of ground today, from the psychology of money to the power of saving to the importance of finding your own definition of enough. And through it all, I think the biggest takeaway for me is this. It's not just about the numbers. It's about understanding ourselves, our biases, our tendencies, so we can make choices that align with what truly matters to us.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
To all our listeners out there, we hope you found this deep dive as thought-provoking as we did. Remember, the journey to financial well-being is just that, a journey. There will be ups and downs, twists and turns along the way, but by understanding the psychology of money, by embracing the shut-up-and-wait philosophy, and by aligning your financial decisions with your values, you can create a life of true wealth and fulfillment. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll see you next time.